We're in this series called Prodigals, and we're looking at the story of the prodigal son, a story that Jesus told in order to help people understand who God is and what God is like. And we're in this series looking at it for 3 weeks, and that's because there's 3 main characters in this particular story. There's the father, which represents God. There's the older brother, which represents people who were religious people. And then there's the younger brother who represents irreligious people, people who had no desire to know anything about Jesus and those kinds of things. And so we're taking a look at each of those in this series. And the reason why we're doing that is because that's who was in the audience when Jesus told this story. And for some of us, this story is a familiar story. But in order to understand the story, it's helpful to understand who was in the audience. And in the audience was Pharisees and teachers of the law. They were the religious people. They were the people that were trying to please God, were trying to do what was right, and they had all of these rules and things that they did to try to please God. At the same time, in the audience, there was irreligious people, people who were culturally Jewish, but who had decided for whatever reason that they weren't going to try to follow the laws of God and the rules of God and those kinds of things. And so in this particular audience, you have both of these groups of people, kind of like we have here today, perhaps. Perhaps some of you would identify with the more religious people. You know, you're a church person, you're a God person, you're trying your best to do what's right and to follow Jesus and that kind of thing. For others of you, you may fall on the other side. Church might be new to you, or you might be trying to figure out a relationship with God or trying to understand who Jesus is. And others of you might be somewhere in the middle. You're not quite sure where you're at or where you fit, and you're a little bit of both, perhaps. But wherever you are at today here, you're part of Jesus' audience as he tells this somewhat familiar story to some of us. And as he does that, he's trying to make a point. And as he does that, he's speaking to each person in the audience. And so wherever you're at today on this spectrum of people, this story is for you. You can find yourself in the story. You can perhaps find somebody you relate to in the story. And so Jesus starts off, and it's actually not just one story, but it's actually 3 stories strung together. There's a story about a lost sheep, and then there's a story about a lost coin, and Jesus does that to kind of set up the audience. And as Jesus does that, he tells the story of the lost sheep and the story of the lost coin. Everybody in Jesus' audience is nodding their head. Everybody in Jesus' audience is agreeing with each other. It's perhaps the first time in their life that they've agreed with one another. You got the religious people and the irreligious people, and they're finally agreeing. And then Jesus launches in to the 3rd story, the point he's trying to get at. And he says, there was a man who had 2 sons. And so these 2 sons, there's an older brother who represents the religious people. And there's a younger brother who represents the irreligious people. And the dad, he represents God. And Jesus says, the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Now, when he says this, everybody in Jesus' audience is like, ooh. Because that would have been offensive for a son to say that to his father. And what he's saying to his father is, "Dad, I wish you were dead. We don't have really a relationship. I'm more interested in your things than I am in a relationship with you." Imagine that. The other reason why they would have just, the other reason why he's saying that is because he knew that he wanted to live a certain kind of lifestyle. And the lifestyle that he knew he wanted to live, he knew he couldn't do that under his father's roof. And maybe some of you have been there. Maybe some of you grew up in a strict household and you just couldn't wait to get out, and you graduated high school and you were gone. And then you could do what you wanted to do, and you could make your own rules and live the way you wanted to live, and you just kind of lived it up, perhaps for some of you. That's what Jesus is portraying here with this younger son. He's saying he knew he couldn't live that kind of lifestyle under his father's roof. And so he asked for his share of the estate. And his audience is like, what in the world is going on? And his audience is expecting something. It says, so what would you think he would do? How do you think he would respond? Well, Jesus' audience would think he would respond, no way. Slap him upside the head, take his cell phone away, and get back to work. But that's not what he did. It says, so he divided his property between them. The older son would have gotten 2/3 of the estate. The younger son would have gotten 1/3. And so he would have, the dad in this story, remember, it's just a made-up story, Jesus making a point, but he would take 1/3 of his estate and give it to the younger son. Again, Jesus' audience is like, what in the world is going on? This would have caught them off guard. They wouldn't quite been sure what was happening here in the story. But Jesus continues. He says, not long after that, not long after the younger son got all the money, he says the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. He was just living it up, and just going through whatever he wanted to do, whenever he wanted to do it, however he wanted to do it. And he goes and he's just living it up and spending and spending and spending like it's never going to run out. It says after he had spent everything, because eventually it ran out. He didn't have so much that he could just go on forever. Eventually it ran out, and then Jesus kind of he's just taking him down a rabbit hole. He said it's just going to get worse and worse and worse for this guy. He says then there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. He ran out of money. Not only did he run out of money in that particular area of the world, at that particular time, Jesus is saying there was a famine. And so it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And it says, so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. So he got a job. All right? No big deal, right? He gets a job. And then Jesus makes it worse. He says, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now, remember who Jesus is speaking to. He's speaking to Jewish people. And Jewish people didn't like pigs. They considered pigs unclean because of the law that God had given them. And so, because they considered them unclean, they didn't eat them and they didn't raise them. They would have considered them just dirty, and anybody who did that, it was just they would have looked down upon them. Now, and here is this Jewish boy that's off. And he spent everything, and he's got no money, and he decides to get a job, and this is the only job he can get. And then Jesus makes it even worse. It says he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Evidently, he wasn't getting paid very much. And so he's wanting to eat what the pigs were eating, but he couldn't. Now, I'm struggling to get across to you the extent to which Jesus is making this younger son and the depths to which he's going. And it's just worse and worse and worse. In fact, it's kind of like this guy hit rock bottom, right? He's run out of money. He's run out of potential jobs. He's got basically the worst job he could get. It's not paying very much. There's no prospects for anything better because of the famine. Jesus just makes this worst case scenario. And for some of you, you've been there. Some of you've been rock bottom. You've been there when the money ran out, or when your friend ran away, or when life was just, you didn't know where else to turn. And that's the point Jesus is getting at, is that in this particular story that Jesus has made up to make a point, that's his point, that this guy has hit rock bottom. And then it says, when he came to his senses, at some point in this journey, at some point, we don't know how long it took for him to get there, but at some point he got there. At some point he came to his senses. And he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. He starts thinking back. Thinking back to his dad and how things were there. He thought about how his dad, the people who worked for his dad, they had it pretty good. They had it better than he has it now. And he starts thinking about that. And maybe, just maybe, I could go back. He says, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him. So he's thinking, that would be better. It would be better to go back, not as a son. I've ruined that. But I could go back and work for him. And he begins to rehearse this speech in his head. What kind of speech do I need to give Dad in order for him to take me back? Not take me back as a son, but take me back as one of his workers. What kind of speech can I give him in order for him to accept me? And he starts going through and he says, okay, Father, he's going to start with, I have sinned against heaven and against you. That's a good place to start, right? And perhaps in this story, perhaps he's starting to realize the extent to what he's done. Perhaps he's starting to realize, or perhaps it's just a speech. Jesus doesn't really tell us. But he carries on with his speech he's thinking about. He says, I am no longer worthy to be called your son, which is absolutely true, right? If you ever just say, Dad, I wish you were dead, and then off you go to waste all of Dad's hard-earned money, like, I'm no longer worthy to be your son, kind of fits that description, right? But you know, that is true for us when it comes to God. That you and me, no matter how good we are, no matter how often we are in church, no matter how often we try to do our best, you and me, we're not worthy to be his son or daughter. It's only through the grace and mercy and love and forgiveness of Jesus. He says, I'm not worthy to be called your son. He's going through this in his head. He says, make me like one of your hired servants. So it's almost as if, as this guy is preparing his speech in his head, it's almost as if, okay, I know I can't go back as a son, but I can go back as a hired hand. I can go back and earn my way back into my Father's good graces. Because if I go back and start working, he's going to see what a good worker I am and a hard worker, and I'm going to start earning my way back into his good graces. I'm going to earn his love back. I'm going to earn his trust back. I'm going to earn his honor and respect back if I go back and just work hard. At least I think that's what's going through his head. I think that's what Jesus is trying to get the audience to pick up on and understand. It says, so he got up and he went to his father. He gets up and he just heads back. And he's got this speech rehearsing in his head, and he knows what he's going to say when he gets back. And so he gets back and he starts going through his speech, and he's rehearsed it, and I'm not worthy, and all of those things that he just went through. And he starts rehearsing all that. It says, but the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. In other words, the father is not ready to take him back as a hired hand. The father's not ready to hire him back as a worker. The father is ready to bring him back as a son. Those things about the robe and the ring and the sandals, I mean, all of that is a sign of him being able to come back as a son. I mean, the slaves and the servants, they didn't wear shoes. They didn't wear sandals. Sons, they wore sandals. The dad is letting him know and letting everyone else know. Jesus is letting his audience know that when this guy comes back, if he decides to come home, and the invitation is always, hey, you're welcome home at any time. I'm here for you. And so if anyone who is lost ever comes back home and ever comes back and it says, I'm not worthy, well, anybody who ever does that, you come back as a child of God. You come back as a son or a daughter. Jesus is letting his audience know this. And he's letting him, his son know this. Now, we don't know what was going through the son's mind, if he was genuine in saying, I'm not worthy, and genuinely accepting all of that. Jesus doesn't tell us all of that. But we do know that the older brother, he gets a little upset about all this, and we talked a little bit about that last week. And then as the father is having a conversation with the older brother about what was going on, about why he brought his son back into the fold and why he brought him back as a son and not just as a worker. As they're having that conversation, the father says to the older brother, but we had to celebrate. We had to celebrate because they threw a big party. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was dead relationally because he told me, hey, I wish you were dead. I mean, that's basically what he said. And so our relationship, the relationship with the father and the younger brother, that relationship was dead. And now it's alive again. It's restored. And so that's why we had to celebrate. He says he was lost and is found, just like the sheep and just like the coin. The younger brother was lost. And now he's back. Now he's found. Just like the sheep and just like the coin. And so if you're here today and you can relate a little bit to that, and you're not quite sure where you're at with God, and perhaps he's been distant, and perhaps you've been away from him. You've been, in Jesus' terms here, you've been lost relationally to your Father in heaven. The invitation to you here today is, come home. Come home. And when you get home, when you don't have to earn your way into God's good graces. You don't have to earn his love. You don't have to earn his respect. You don't have to earn his forgiveness because you can never earn. You can never do enough to earn. You can never do enough to make up for all the bad you've done. The only thing you can do is come back and accept the lavish love of the Father, the forgiveness and the grace through what Jesus has done for us on the cross. You just receive. You receive his love. You receive his grace. You receive his mercy. You receive his forgiveness. And so if that's you here today, the invitation for you is to come home. To come home. Now, for others of you, if you're a follower of Jesus and you're hearing this story and you're not, that doesn't really apply to you, or maybe it did at one stage, but now it doesn't. Maybe there was a stage in your life where you were lost and you went your own way and then you came back. Or maybe some of you never did. If you're a follower of Jesus and you're hearing this story and you're seeing all of this, I want to point something out. That the older brother, at least in the story that Jesus has made up to make a point, the older brother, I think knew where the younger brother was. Because in the older brother's conversation with the father, he said this, but when this son of yours, not my brother, he said, when this son of yours wants nothing to do with him, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. See, how did he know? How did he know what the younger brother was doing? Unless he knew what the younger brother was doing. Unless he knew where he was. So perhaps, I don't know, we can ask Jesus one day, but perhaps the older brother knew where the younger brother was and knew what the younger brother was doing all along, but had nothing in his heart to do anything about it. Had no desire. No desire to go get him. But Jesus told the story about the shepherd who lost 90, or who had 99 and lost one, and the shepherd Of course he went after the one that was lost. Like, that's just logical. That just makes sense. That's just what you did. And the lady who lost 1 coin out of 10, of course she's going to look for the one that was lost. And she did everything she could until she found it. That's just logical. That just makes sense. Then why? Why would you not? Because it's logical. It makes sense. He's your brother. And so for those of us who are followers of Jesus, I just want to say, who do you know that might fit that category? Is there a family member? A friend? A coworker? A neighbor? Somebody else you know that would fit that category of somebody who is lost relationally from their Father in heaven? And you know that their lifestyle doesn't match up, and you know that they're just not living for God and those kinds of things. What's in your heart? Are you indifferent? Do you care? Do you even see and realize what's going on? I think Jesus would say to the younger brother, come. The invitation is to come home. But to the religious people, the people who are calling themselves followers of Jesus, I think he would say, what are you doing? Go be like the shepherd. Go be like the lady. Go and find your brother and invite them to come home. So wherever you're at here today, however you're hearing this story, the invitation from Jesus is to always come home. And perhaps if you're a follower of Jesus, you need to go invite somebody to come home. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your love, your grace, your mercy, your forgiveness. God, I pray that if there's anyone here today who needs to come home, God, I pray that you would speak into their hearts and minds and give them the courage to do that. And God, for those of us who have a relationship with you, God, may you so work on our hearts. Show us who we need to invite back home into a relationship with you. And then give us the courage to follow through with that. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.